Hello, my fellow Canadian investors. If you don't know me, I am Justin from Tater, and in this video we are going to run through the socially responsible investing portfolios from RBC. We will explain how they are constructed and look at the individual holdings, the individual ETFs that are held in the portfolio. So let's get started. We will start off looking at the very conservative portfolio, which of course has the highest allocation towards fixed income out of all of the offerings. And speaking of the other portfolios, if you are more interested in one with more equities, then this one is still applicable since it has all of the same ETFs as those found in the more aggressive portfolios. The first holding on the list is XSTB, which is a short-term bond index ETF, and of course has a responsible investing theme. The MER for this ETF is 0.17%. It looks to track a short-term bond index, and this index can change at the discretion of BlackRock. Currently, it is looking to replicate the MSCI 1 to 5 year Canadian Aggregate ESG Focus Index. Scrolling down, you can see that the majority of bonds in this ETF are those from the Canadian government, and to a lesser extent, some exposure to corporate bonds. So this is a very well-diversified short-term bond index ETF in that it provides broad exposure to the Canadian investment-grade short-term bond market. Of course, it has a socially responsible theme, and to that end, one of its goals is to optimize its exposure to positive environmental, social, and governance factors. So that does it for XSTB. Let's have a look at the next ETF on the list, another fixed income holding, XSAB. This is the iShares ESG Aware Canadian Aggregate Bond Index ETF. So this would be the equivalent to the short-term bond index. However, it would also hold medium and long-term bonds. On to the next ETF in the list, and the final fixed income ETF in the portfolio. This is XGGB, also in RBC's standard portfolios, the iShares Global Government Bond Index ETF. So this would not strictly be considered a socially responsible ETF. It invests mostly in the US, Japanese, and European governments. As you can see, it has an MER of 0.22%. It is hedged to the Canadian dollar. And as we mentioned previously, this is what you want for a global bond ETF because the fixed income portion of our portfolio is supposed to be the most stable and least volatile. So we do not want exposure to foreign currency fluctuations in this portion of our portfolio. All right, so that does it for the fixed income portion of this portfolio. Prior to diving into the equity ETFs, we just wanted to mention the spreadsheet that you see in front of you. It has been pre-formatted and loaded up with many of the popular Robo-Advisor portfolios. As you can see, we are looking at the RBC Very Conservative portfolio, so we could build this portfolio along with any of the other ones. So let's stop at the RBC Growth portfolio and use that as an example. You just load up the total amount you have to invest initially, and then you buy the number of shares that it shows you to buy in the shares to buy column. This way, users can build their own portfolios and save on all of the fees that they would otherwise be paying to the banks and brokerages. And those fees can be 0.5% or more and take a huge chunk out of your investment portfolio. We are talking like 6 or even 7 figures over the long term. So if you're interested in receiving this spreadsheet to help build one of these Robo-Advisor portfolios on your own to save on all of the fees, simply sign up for our course, which provides support in building and maintaining these portfolios using the spreadsheet. And if you have any questions, you can simply scroll down to the contact area and reach out to us. And as you can see, we offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Okay, now let's get back to the portfolio. We will now dive into the different equity ETFs. First on the list is the Canadian Equity XESG. This is iShares ESG Aware MSCI Canada Index ETF. Looking at the fact sheet, this one has an MER of 0.16%. It looks to replicate an ESG-oriented index that is handpicked by BlackRock. Currently, as of December 2013, it is the MSCI Canada IMI Extended ESG Focus Index. So it should perform similarly to the MSCI Canada IMI Index. This one has just over 300 constituents, so you get a large swath of the large, mid, and small cap stocks in the Canadian market. Hopping back over to the portfolio manager, the next equity ETF on the list is XSUS.
This is similar to the Canadian ETF, except of course it contains US stocks. This one should perform similarly to the MSCI USA index in terms of risk and return. So that index tracks the performance of large and mid-cap stocks in the US. So it is essentially like owning about 85% of the largest US stocks. So XSUS would perform very similar to this index, except of course there is an ESG focus, which means they emphasize stocks that have favorable ESG characteristics. And as you can see, this one has an MER of 0.22%. Okay, hopping back to the Tater Portfolio Manager, we will look at the last equity ETF on the list. This is your International Equity Index ETF, very similar to its Canadian and US counterparts. The index it would perform similarly to is the MSCI EAFE index. It tracks large and mid-cap stocks across 21 developed markets in the world. It does not include US and Canada, which is good because the other equity ETFs we have already cover those countries, and it has almost 800 stocks. So the index that XSEA attempts to replicate would perform similarly to this index, but of course it would have an ESG focus. As you can see, it has an MER of 0.28%, pretty reasonable for an international SRI equity ETF. So that's it for the ETFs in this portfolio. Looking again at the breakdown, 80% fixed income, 20% equities. Half of the equity exposure is in Canada. The rest is split between the US and the rest of the developed world. The majority of the bond holdings are in Canada. You get a little bit of extra short-term bond exposure with a little bit of international fixed income thrown in there as well. The overall MER is 0.18%. Very good for an SRI ETF portfolio. Okay, so let's hop over to the conservative portfolio and check out some of the differences between it and the very conservative portfolio. So equities up from 20% to 35%. All of the same ETFs in this portfolio that you saw in the last one, and the MER is up just 1 basis point to 0.19%. In terms of fixed income holdings, you get a little bit more of the global bond ETF, and of course less of the two other ones since there is a smaller allocation towards fixed income overall. Equities, 15% Canadian, and then 10% each of US and international equities. Over to the RBC SRI balanced portfolio, you can see that they have gotten rid of the short-term bond ETF and added in an emerging markets ETF, very similar to the other equity ETFs in that it tracks an MSCI emerging markets index favoring companies with strong ESG characteristics. Canadian equities get 20%, as do the US, down to 10% for international equities and 5% for the emerging market fund. Over to the growth portfolio, equities up from 55% to 70% in this one. All of the same ETFs as you saw in the balanced portfolio. Down to 18% for the short-term bond ETF and down to 10% for the Canadian Aggregate Bond Index ETF. Canadian and US equities, 24% each. International gets 14% and 8% for the emerging market ETF. And then the aggressive growth portfolio, very similar to RBC's standard portfolio in that there are 98% equities. So this is a very aggressive portfolio. The 2% in fixed income is just cash, so they don't have any bond ETFs. It is all equities, 31% each of the Canadian and US ETFs, 26% of the international, and 10% of the emerging markets. And the MER has slowly creeped up 1 basis point each portfolio, and it is now at 0.22%. Okay, so to wrap up here, the RBC responsible investing portfolios are very much in line with traditional index portfolios in that they are weighted according to market capitalization. They do, of course, have that responsible investing theme, which they accomplish through targeting companies with strong ESG factors. The very conservative portfolio is right in line with their competitors in terms of the mix of fixed income to equities. However, the aggressive portfolio is very aggressive, 98% equities, far too aggressive for the vast majority of investors. Because there are 5 total portfolios, it might be difficult for some investors to find their desired mix of equities and fixed income. If you feel like you fall into this category, then please let us know and we'll be
happy to put together a portfolio that is customized to meet your investing needs and your desired allocation towards equities and fixed income. So that's it for now. We hope you found this video informative. Please like and subscribe, and check out mytater.ca, where you can duplicate just about any Robo-Advisor portfolio out there and cut out all of the fees that would otherwise be paid to the banks and brokerages. And those fees can be 0.5% or more and take a huge chunk out of your investment portfolio. We are talking like 6 or even 7 figures over the long term. So check it out. We will see you next time.